Welcome to Spiral We Radio, where we explore new ways of understanding and supporting every kind of learner. Your hosts, Dr. Barry Gelston and Dr. Karen Arnstein, have been collaborating for more than 8 years, developing the spiral model and spiral adaptive lens, powerful frameworks that reshape how we see giftedness, twice exceptionality, and neurodiversity. In this very first episode, Barry and Karen share their origin story, how they met at a SENG conference, how their shared curiosities sparked years of research, and how their work continues to change the conversation about learning, connection, and human potential.
Hi, everybody. I'm Barry Gelston, and I am here with my research partner and business partner at Spiral Week, Karen Arnstein. Karen and I will be hosting this show for years to come. But as we get started, I'd like for us you to get to know us. Who are we? And take some time to hear about our origin story. So, Karen, tell us about the first time that we met and how we got started on this long journey for Spiral Week.
Hey, Barry. Thanks for taking the time today for us to have this episode. That's a great question. So we met, I think it was back in the SENG conference in San Jose in 2016. And I met you at the time, it was in the exhibitor hall. And I met Mr. Gelston. It was a year later in 2017, met again at the Chicago SENG conference, 2017. I had just started my doctoral program that summer in June. And I brought my son to SENG. So that was the first time I brought him with me. And I thought, you know something, I happened to see you at Starbucks in our hotel. And I thought, let me ask him some questions because I need some help for how do I keep this kid challenged for math in elementary school. And so that's when I approached you and I said, you know, more than just sort of going up to your exhibitor booth, but approaching you at Starbucks and introducing myself and saying, hey, we met last year, but I could use your advice. So, and then that's also when you saw my son at the same time, which you didn't seem to be paying any attention to me. You were so like watching him playing Flight Simulator on an iPad, simultaneously holding a conversation and noticing everything else around him and all of the pilots walking in and out of the Starbucks at the time. Do you remember that?
I do. It's ADHD heaven, I think they call that.
Yeah. But I said to you, I had this really weird, crazy idea. So even though I needed some help for how do I educate my child, who was clearly gifted in math, but I had this idea from my first quarter of my doctoral program at the University of Denver. I needed a thought partner. I didn't know how to be able to show this mathematically or even graphically. It was I think it's more of like still an abstract idea.
It's interesting because when I think back to that time, I think about how Karen had this big idea and it was big and I could visually see it floating around in her head. And I'm pretty sure you had hands moving all over the place and tried to explain it. And I hope you don't mind, but I make the joke that you were kind of like Richard Dreyfuss in Close Encounter of the Third Kind. And you were trying to build the mud statue of the mountain. And you were getting there because you knew that there was something special at the end of this journey. And you were really trying to figure out, how do I get this abstract visualization? So folks, Dr. Arnstein is a visual thinker. She puts together beautiful images in her head. And she's also, brilliant in other ways, but she's a great creator in her head and can see how things come together. And so my challenge at that point was exciting for me because I have a love for research and measurement. And I studied that many years ago, back in the 80s. And I even worked at Yale University as a research associate in testing and measurement and working on psychiatric research. So I was excited to finally get a chance to discuss somebody's research idea and put it down into process and make it concrete and make it, numeric and give it symbols and all those things that we do. So we kept talking, and I remember the struggle that we had of really trying to figure out what this dependent variable was. I don't know if I asked you that word or not, but I kept asking, what are you measuring and what are you controlling?
It was a tough question. So that one sort of stumped us for several years. I remember I didn't even have the name of the spiral model just yet. Even back in 2017, 2018, it took me a couple of years of thinking about this while I was in my doctoral program. And I came up with this shape. I remember I was studying, I was in Denver at the time, and I was in the library. And I had read all these articles about Dabrowski and overexcitabilities and the theory of positive disintegration. I had been reading about Erikson and Piaget and Vygotsky, and so all of these developmental theorists. And it just seemed like their work was valid, but it didn't seem to describe this particular subgroup. So when I say subgroup, I'm talking about those neurodivergent learners, the gifted kids, the high capability kids, the twice exceptional, multi-exceptional kids. And I felt frustrated because there wasn't a theorist, there wasn't a kind of a model that really described their development and what I was experiencing at home and also in the classroom with other students. I guess the most frustrating part of this was that all those models seemed linear, right? So you get to one step, you move on to the next step, you complete those stages, and then you keep moving up. So it seemed almost either vertical or like stair steps. But that's not what I was seeing in reality, where sometimes a student or a child could be in multiple stages simultaneously, without necessarily completing one before moving on to the second, third, or fourth. And I thought none of these seemed to fit. So I was sitting in the library and I looked up and I looked out the window, and it was the most like striking moment. Like I still get chills, right? My hair stands up when I think about it, because I had this image in my mind of this huge gemstone, and it was rotating slowly on its own axis. And at the same time, light was reflecting off of it. Light was refracting through it. And I thought to myself, wait a second. As an adult, I would be offended if somebody thought I was two-dimensional. Like, I have so many sides to me, right? All of us do. We are spouses, we're friends, we're parents, we're children of other people, right? We have multiple sides to us. So why do we think about children and students as maybe being one or two dimensional, that we're only assessing them or looking at them through one or two lenses and that's it? And so that's when I started to realize, wait a second here, we need to be looking at our students, not just in real time, but in motion simultaneously. This is not something where we complete a task, we put it away, we move on to the next task. And I think the same goes for curriculum as well. Right, Barry, you're a math teacher.
Well, in math, we use the expression, I think it comes out of the Chicago School of Math, that we look at a spiral model of math and math education. And it's not necessarily the spiral exactly how we look at it, but they start with basic skills in the early grades. And so, for example, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And every year you revisit addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, except first you start with counting numbers and whole numbers, ordinal numbers, right? And then you go to rational numbers, and eventually in fifth and sixth grade, we get to integers, and it becomes a lot more interesting, but it really is the same things that we're doing over and over again within arithmetic, and same thing in geometry. So we spiral, but not everybody spirals in a straight line, so to say. I know that's an oxymoron, but, and even just saying it doesn't make sense, and it brings your point, makes it crystal clear. But we don't assume linear progression. As a math teacher, we
Right.
expect kids to go forward, go back. Then you get summer vacation, and then you know you're going back forever. and you almost have to restart the end of the previous year together. And so you're reviewing and then moving forward. And and then you have a different teacher with a different perspective and a different way of teaching. And then the child has to adapt to the teacher and the teacher has to adapt to the child. So there's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of
Mhm.
regression going on before it can go forward. And if we think of it that way, just for math education, imagine what it's like for a 2E learner or just even a gifted learner or any neurodiverse learner who's asynchronous. And they already have asynchronous development. And then we're expecting this asynchrony to just not matter and not be impacted any differently than anybody else. That's kooky. That's just silly talk.
Well, and I think
Right?
it sets us up. I think that having that expectation of this linear progression, especially for asynchronous students, and even your asynchronous child, that having that expectation sets everybody up for failure. It doesn't set you up for success. And I kept working on this just in my own mind. And in fact, there was this crazy story that I think I had like this final paper that I had to turn in. It was my very first quarter of my doctoral program. And I was sitting there at the mouse and I'm ready to hit submit because in the end of this paper, I actually started to describe this multifaceted perspective, right? This three-dimensional, rotating, spiraling idea of development. And I remembered having this massive anxiety attack while I'm 1,000 miles from home. And I called my husband and I said, I can't turn this paper in. I can't do it. But I didn't want to change it. And he's like, why can't you turn it in? I said, because I'm going to get kicked out of the program. It's so crazy, right? Like I just felt like you were saying, like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, that it was so out
Yeah,
there that they were
right.
going to say, sorry, we made a huge mistake letting you in.
At home, you're now Dr. Arnstein and you got through
Yes,
just fine.
thank
Yes.
you. Um, But my husband really, I think he gave me perspective too, because he said, you know something, you're in a doctoral program. And if they can't think about or be accepting of new ideas, you're not in the right place.
Yeah.
And that just helped ground me. So,
I want to say the nice thing about that story is that it may not even be about the graduate program, but it was you learning to accept yourself as somebody who can take the leap, take the risk, and really just go with your instincts, which are this is what I'm thinking. And I have my place in the world of academia, and I'm somebody too, and my opinion counts. And if there's an argument that it's not right, well, then let's hear it, let's discuss it, and move on. But in the meanwhile, I got an idea and I got to share it with you. And it was, I have to say, a pretty good one. I like it. I'm
thank
spending
you.
years on it now.
I, the funny thing was that the response that I got back from my professor was, tell me more. I'm so
Nice.
excited. I want to hear, like, keep working on this. This is exciting. So it was, I mean, it was so validating to get that back a few weeks later. But yeah, Barry, it
Is
was.
it?
It was me having confidence in myself that I had this idea that I couldn't find it grounded in the literature anywhere. So yeah, it was a big step for me too, to put myself out there.
Now you would look at that if you saw a student come to you and say, you have found a gap in the literature.
Yes.
But for so many people, it's like, oh, it's not there. I must be doing something wrong. Now, I want to go
Yeah.
back to something that you said, which is interesting because a lot of parents, and I was one of them, when my son was born back in the 90s, the literature he had to read were things like what to expect when you're expecting, what to expect when your child is born. I forgot the names of them. And they give you these ranges, and they're told that these are the norms that your normal kid should be in.
Right.
And it had no connection to reality for so many people. It was a normative based book. And it's interesting for me as someone who's trained as a statistician and a researcher. And it really has gotten me to change my perspective on what I do as a statistician researcher, and my perspective and how it's changed over time is as much as we want to analyze things from the center out, we don't realize how much we miss when we don't focus on outliers or the outer
Yeah.
1.5 standard deviations from the norm. I don't know if this is too esoteric for now, but I've come to appreciate that even the norm child, the one, that 50 percentile or person, is an outlier, because the median person is just one person and cannot reflect all children or most children. It's a collection, let's say just plus or minus one standard deviation. About 67% of kids fall into the middle. And that's even assuming that they're somehow representative of what that middle is. I think that's a better way to put it. We assume
Yeah.
that the middle actually represents, and we don't fully grasp the meaning of variance around that. So hope I'm not upsetting people out there who don't like math. But this is really important in how we do this, and that's a big part of what we do. And we do use mathematical imagery to explain some things that we do, but we're not interested per se in doing calculus problems. That's
They
my
said there'd be
problem.
no math today.
And there is,
When I
I'm
agreed to
sorry,
this.
there's a part of me that's still Mr. Gelston.
Funny is I went back to the bookstore. I just went to my local Barnes and Noble, and I went to look at the parenting section just to see. And even the book, and I can't remember the name of it, but I remember it was Dr. Spock who wrote it, right? It's like the quintessential person, like that quintessential person who will help you to understand how to raise your children. And it's funny, I went back through, and even he followed Erickson's 8 stages of development pretty closely too. And I'm not knocking Erickson, but I'm just saying that for some of these kids, they don't follow those expectations.
And they don't follow it at the same pace, which is, I think what you're saying is that some kids rush into a phase, some kids mosey along and take their time to get there. And all of those are okay because everybody has their own rhythm. And there's a judgment, which is assumed that if you're not meeting those paces and you're not at least in the middle, that there's a problem. And I don't know what problem is. A child is a child, and there's somebody to love.
True.
And so when you get to know your child or you get to know your student, you're a person to either love, to teach and care about, and help them move forward within your domain of responsibility. And a little bit more, being a good person and practicing good ethical treatment to them, so that you can model it for the student.
That's true. It was a couple of years later after that, I think it was the summer of 2019, we were in Houston. And I said, Barry, I've got to talk to you. I think I'm further along. And here I've got this like XY axis, right? And I'm sitting here and I'm trying to figure this out. And I didn't know what to use for this axis. Like, do I use age? Is that how we determine development for the gifted and twice exceptional asynchronous neurodivergent population? Do we use curriculum? Do we use age? I think we cycled through at least 3, 4, 5 different what do we use as that dependent variable?
We struggled a lot with that, and we went back and forth, and I was like, well, are we talking about, if you want to know how they're doing, then, I was really going for all the traditional things like, do they have math scores? Do they have English scores? Where do the scores come from? Are they from standardized testing? Is it from the regular, intermittent testing that's done to do grade leveling that's out there? And so we went back and forth, but it kept coming back to this idea, well, they look funny. And you had this great story, maybe you can tell it, about your math teacher. And because this is something that really triggered your perspective on this.
I tell this story sometimes, especially when I'm presenting about the spiral model, but I remember being in third grade, Mrs. Rogers. So she was my third grade math teacher. And for months, literally months, I worked on the same long division problem every single day. And I kept lining up for help at her desk, waiting in line patiently. And then when I finally got up to the front of the line, she would tell me to go back to my desk and look at it again and figure it out. And it was so frustrating for me. I cannot tell you, like, I think it impacted me for years, thinking that I was not capable of doing math, that I wasn't worthy of a teacher's attention. So while sitting at my desk on the side of the classroom, she would then work with the other students on this chalkboard, because I'm that old. And they were working on different ideas and sort of moving ahead. And so I just kept sitting there watching them and listening to what she was talking about while I sat with my paper the whole time. So it was a far more interesting conversation than what I was doing. But I remember finishing third grade, and I went to fourth grade and fifth grade and sixth grade, and all of a sudden, I just zoomed ahead of all of my classmates in math. Like, I ended up being the fastest at multiplication tables, the quickest at picking up new concepts. And so I'm thankful for those teachers in fourth and fifth and sixth grade to help rebuild me and rebuild my self-concept and my self-esteem when it came to doing math. But it's tough. I never even thought that I should say something to a parent, right? I thought that's just how, I just thought it was me.
There's an essence to this that I find important, which is that you've often described to me that your teacher had a perception of you, and the perception affected how she treated you. Can you explain more
Yeah.
about that?
I think she perceived me as incapable, like not worth her time. And I started to internalize that, which is sad at 8 years old. But I started to internalize that, and that actually stayed with me for decades. That a professor or a manager at my job, that I wasn't worth someone else's time, that I was perceived as not capable, not smart enough, that I didn't have enough perseverance. And it took me a long time to be able to move past some of those things, but I still remember feeling smaller than and less than. But I wasn't. She wasn't curious as to why this was difficult for me. What was I struggling with? She just sent me away.
So I come back to this because this actually became the answer to our dependent variable. And the answer to the dependent variable, our discussion on this became, and I kept trying to come up with an explanation on a way to say this. So I was struggling with my words a lot too. Again, that same conceptual to abstract, and then getting it into language. And I could think of two things. One was notes that a doctor or a psychologist take when they first see somebody, where they make a note on the appearance of somebody.
Right.
Karen appears to have, healthy skin and has a positive attitude. That's her appearance. And then I was thinking, well, what are they judging? Because it's not, the pallor of your skin or your smile. They're really judging your competence. So to me, the term started to become appearance of competence. And I use that, and people are like, huh? What do you mean? And they kept looking for a student trait and actually not a teacher trait. because appearance of competence is not a student trait. There's no way to measure the student for their appearance of competence. And that was a problem I had even into my dissertation, was having to write that no, appearance of competence is not a reflection on the student, it's a reflection on how the teacher perceives the student. And so that became our dependent variable. Now, it turns out that from the work that we did is that we are actually let go of a quantitative approach and move to more of a grounded theory qualitative approach. And in doing so, we looked at process and identifying the process of how teachers made these judgments and what they saw and what they did. And we'll talk about that more in other interviews. You want to share about that?
Sure. I was going to add one more thing too, is that I think when I had first come up with the idea of this spiral and I saw this like beautiful pinkish, purplish giant gemstone, like a solitaire diamond that was slowly rotating, I didn't realize at the time that not everyone has advanced spatial thinking. I literally thought everybody did that. And so that was also part of this too, is that not realizing, oh, it wasn't until later that I found out that only 30% of the population thinks in pictures like this, and can like rotate things mentally in their mind and see different sides of something. That was a learning experience for me too. So part of this process, Barry, has been, how do I find the language? How do I find the terminology and be able to relate what I see and put this into words so it's understandable, so that teachers could use this or understand it, so parents could use this and understand it too. I don't always think in language, I think in pictures, but I didn't realize that then.
It's pretty incredible because so much of what we have to do is figure out after you get the thought and you can go, wow, that's great, and you're proud of yourself. But then the trouble of it is really, how do you translate that research into everyday conversation? And we work hard at doing that, and it's not easy for us on different levels. I mean, on one hand, we're educators and we work with kids and we teach them, and we support our friends and parents that we know. So we do that, but it still is a constant struggle, and we're always doing that, and we're always trying to find ways to get to that common space that we're hitting, what we're doing, getting to that point where we explain ourselves well. And in doing so, the exciting thing is that we all of a sudden learn more. And
Yeah.
through our process of talking things through to make sure that we're understandable, it actually helps us understand it on another level as well. So
I'm very thankful to have you as a thought partner and now research partner and a friend to start this.
well,
It's very exciting. It's
same
been
here.
exciting working on this for years.
It has. And, we're going to wrap up in a few minutes, but I just want to
Hmm.
share with people that this didn't happen overnight. Like Dr. Arnstein said, we've been having these conversations 7, 8 years. And at first they were very intermittent. And then it started to pick up. And I didn't think even that I would be doing my dissertation on this topic at first. It wasn't even on my radar. It was just a fun conversation that I was having with Karen. And I got to hang out with my friend and chat about this cookie spiral model. And over time, I was like, you know what? I really do like this. And I really have a lot of fun having this conversation and having a peer and thought partner and friend to discuss this through. And I've been really lucky to have this partnership with you as research partner and now business partner as we've launched Spiral We. And we've recently incorporated And we're excited to bring information. We've already started putting out our Substack, and we now are launching officially here with this recording our podcast. And there's going to be a lot more to come. And we're just at the beginning, and we're excited to roll out over time all the things that we're doing, but we want to put things out in chunks that are not too big so that we don't get too far ahead of ourselves and get out over our skis, and at the same time make sure that we're explaining things that are understandable. So I'm really looking forward to this journey, and I've enjoyed the journey with you so far, Karen, and I am excited to see who listens and who responds and who replies, and in comments and chats and communities, and hoping too that people jump on the movement who want to do research, or teachers who want to use this in their classroom, because that really is the goal, for this to be something that people use. And um, one last thing, you told me a nice story the other day, and it might be a good way to finish it. We were talking about your son and how you were having an issue, and you told me about flipping your lens to the spiral
Hmm.
adaptive lens. You want to close with that?
Sure. Well, we were actually on a Zoom that day, I think, and we were working on this. Um, Gosh, it was probably what, 6, 8 months ago, maybe 10 months ago. And I've got a teenager at home, neurodivergent teenager. So for any of you who are listening and watching, you definitely understand we have those moments. Um, and I was getting upset, like I was taking this personally because I'm at work, I work from home, I'm trying to stay focused, I don't want to get distracted. In fact, I think you were working on your dissertation at the time, and I was your advisor. And so you said to me, you could tell I was getting really upset and irritated by everything that was going on because I was trying to give you my focus at the time. And so he walks out of the room, and you said to me, you're like, Karen, why don't you just take a moment, breathe, and look at this through the spiral? Look at this whole situation. And I just sat back and I felt like, like I had to take this breath because I thought, oh my God, this isn't about me. I don't need to be upset. I don't need to take this personally. I don't need to have a visceral reaction to what my neurodivergent kid is doing at that moment. That I can sit back and ask, well, what does he need? What's going on in the moment? How can I be curious and take that perspective? And so take this emotionality and the reactivity out of this. So instead of things escalating, they actually started to de-escalate. And by communicating more clearly with him and looking at him through the spiral lens, the spiral adaptive lens that you were working on developing at the time, I think I was able to not just approach him more with curiosity instead of irritation and aggravation, and then look at how can I improvise? How can I change this dialogue? How can we de-escalate the situation that could have gotten out of hand really quickly with people raising voices and him stomping off to his room? But I thought to myself, man, I need to remind myself of this more, like, because I'm a parent at the same time as developing this. And so there's times that I also need to be reminded too, to be able to step back. And so I've used it now and reminded myself, okay, wait a minute. Where is this child right now on their path, on their developmental trajectory, on their spiral around the sun in their own particular orbit? Are they more like Mercury or are they more like Pluto? And so it helps me to step back and be a better parent, but also a better teacher. I'm finding that my teaching skills have improved drastically as well by using the spiral adaptive lens. So thank you, Barry.
You're welcome. I think that's a great place to finish. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you.
That's the beginning of the Spiral We story. In future episodes, Dr. Barry Gelston and Dr. Karen Arnstein will bring you conversations with educators, researchers, parents, and students who are transforming the way we think about learning and connection for neurodiverse people. Be sure to subscribe to Spiral We Radio so you don't miss an episode, and share this with anyone who's passionate about education and human potential.